The metallic screech of tank treads grinding against stone echoes through the narrow Norman lane, as Sergeant Tommy Mears McKenna adjusts his grip on the gunner's controls inside the cramped turret of his M4A1 Sherman. The nickname still stings, earned 3 days ago when he showed up to morning formation with a small shaving mirror duct taped to his periscope mount. The crew had laughed. Hell, half the company had laughed. Captain Rodriguez had even called it the dumbest damn thing I've seen since Private Johnson tried to waterproof his boots with bacon grease. But right now, as German 88-meter shells whistle overhead and the bocage hedgerows tower like green walls on either side of their tank, nobody's laughing. The mirror catches a fragment of sunlight filtering through the dense canopy above, throwing a tiny reflection across the turret wall. In that brief flash, McKenna sees something that makes his blood freeze. The angular silhouette of a Panzer IV's gun barrel, barely visible through a gap in the hedgerow 50 yards ahead. The German tank sits motionless, waiting like a predator. Its crew probably thinking they're perfectly concealed behind the ancient Norman earthworks that have turned this countryside into a maze of death. McKenna's breathing becomes shallow as he studies the reflection more carefully, adjusting the mirror's angle with minute movements of his fingers. Through the small piece of silvered glass, a Gillette shaving mirror he'd bought at a PX in England for 50 cents. He can make out not just one tank, but the shadows of at least 2 more positioned behind the first. It's a perfect ambush, set up at the intersection where their narrow lane meets the main road to Villers-Bocage. The Germans have done this before, probably many times, luring American tanks into these killing zones where the bocage turns every advance into a deadly game of blind man's bluff. The sound of their own engine seems impossibly loud in the confined space. The Ford GAA V8 rumbles and vibrates through the hull, a constant reminder that they're sitting in 33 tons of steel that might as well be a coffin if they make the wrong move. McKenna can smell everything. The diesel fumes mixing with gun oil, the leather of his headset soaked with sweat, the metallic tang of fear that seems to coat the inside of his mouth. Through the mirror, he watches the German tank commander's head appear in his cupola, scanning the lane with Zeiss binoculars that probably cost more than McKenna made in 6 months. 4 weeks earlier, the 2nd Armored Division had been grinding through the Norman countryside, learning the hard way that every field, every intersection, every gap in the ancient hedgerows could hide death. The bocage, those centuries-old earthen walls topped with thick hedges, had turned tank warfare into something no American crew had trained for back at Fort Knox. These weren't the open plains of Europe that the Sherman had been designed to fight on, where American tanks could use their speed and numbers to outflank German positions. This was a maze of narrow lanes and high walls where German anti-tank guns and panzers could appear from nowhere, fire and vanish before anyone could return effective fire. The statistics were brutal, and every tanker in Normandy knew them by heart. In the first week of bocage fighting, the 2nd Armored had lost 37 tanks, more than an entire battalion's worth of armor. Most of them had been destroyed in ambushes just like the one McKenna is staring at through his mirror. Tank commanders, desperate to see over the hedgerows that rose 12 to 15 feet above the narrow lanes, had been forced to expose their turrets, making themselves perfect targets for German gunners, who knew every angle, every gap, every killing field in this ancient landscape. The German tactics were simple and effective. They'd position their tanks or anti-tank guns at intersections, covering the approaches with interlocking fields of fire. When American tanks appeared, the Germans would let them get close, sometimes within 50 yards, before opening fire. At that range, even the feared German 88mm guns couldn't miss, and the narrow lanes made it impossible for American tanks to maneuver or retreat quickly. McKenna had grown up in rural Montana, in timber country where his father ran a small logging operation near Glacier National Park. The old man, a veteran of the Argonne Forest in the last war, had taught his son to hunt deer and elk in thick woods, where visibility was measured in yards, not miles. "Son," he used to say while they tracked game through dense pine forests, "sometimes you gotta see around corners before you stick your neck out." A smart hunter uses every trick he can think of: reflections in water, shadows on snow, even the way birds fly when something spooks them. The animal that lives longest is the one that sees danger before danger sees him. That lesson had stuck with McKenna through basic training at Fort Knox, where drill sergeants had screamed at him for 18 weeks about the proper way to load, aim, and fire a tank gun. It had stayed with him through gunnery school at Fort Sill, where he'd learned to put 75mm shells through barn doors at 1,000 yards, calculating windage and elevation with the precision of a mathematician. It had been with him during the long Atlantic crossing aboard a Liberty ship, where he'd spent hours in the Sherman's turret, memorizing every control, every sight picture, every sound the gun made when it fired. But it wasn't until he watched 3 Shermans from a company get picked off in a single morning, their commanders forced to expose their turrets to see over the hedgerows, that he remembered his father's hunting mirror. The old man had carried a small shaving mirror in his hunting pack, using it to see around trees and rocks without exposing himself to wary game. "Deer got eyes like a hawk and ears like a bat," he'd explained to young Tommy during a hunting trip when the boy was 12. "But they don't expect to see a hunter looking at them through a piece of glass. Reflection don't make noise, don't leave scent, don't cast a shadow. It's like having eyes you can put anywhere you want." The crew of Iron Horse, their Sherman named after the Great Northern Railway that ran through McKenna's hometown of Whitefish, Montana, had reacted predictably when he'd shown up with the mirror 3 days ago. Tank Commander Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a college boy from Philadelphia who'd been commissioned straight out of officer candidate school at Fort Benning, had shaken his head in disgust when he saw McKenna taping the mirror to his periscope mount with olive drab duct tape. "McKenna, what the hell is that supposed to be?" Morrison had demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been wrong about anything in his 22 years of life. The lieutenant was a good officer, fair, brave, and smart. But he was also a by-the-book soldier who believed that proper training and standard procedures could solve any problem the Army might face. "Periscope extension, sir," McKenna had replied, trying to keep his voice steady and professional. "Lets me see around corners without exposing the turret. My dad used something like this hunting back home in Montana. Figured it might work here in the bocage." Driver Corporal Pete Kowalski, a tough kid from the steel mills of Pittsburgh, who could make their Sherman dance like a ballerina when he had to, had snorted from his position in the hull. "Jesus, Tommy, what's next? Gonna hang fuzzy dice from the gun barrel? Maybe paint some flames on the side and call it a hot rod?" Even the loader, Private Danny Chen, usually the quiet one who kept his opinions to himself, and did his job with the methodical precision of someone who'd grown up working in his family's restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown, had chuckled. "Sarge, that thing looks like something my little sister would use to check her lipstick before a date. You sure you didn't grab it from the wrong barracks?" The ridicule had stung more than McKenna cared to admit. These men were his crew, his family, the people he trusted with his life every day. Their laughter felt like a betrayal, even though he knew they didn't mean it that way. But McKenna had persisted, driven by a stubborn streak he'd inherited from his father and a growing certainty that the mirror might be the difference between life and death in the bocage. He'd spent hours adjusting the angle, testing the reflection, learning how to read the distorted images the mirror provided. The curved surface created a fisheye effect that took time to interpret, but it gave him a field of view that his regular periscope couldn't match. He could see around corners, over obstacles, through gaps in the hedgerows that would normally require exposing the entire turret. The mirror showed him things that were invisible to the naked eye: the glint of sunlight on German optics, the subtle movement of camouflaged equipment, the telltale shadows that revealed hidden positions. The other crews in their platoon had started calling him mirrors, and not in a friendly way. Word had spread through B Company that McKenna was losing his nerve, trying to fight the war from behind a makeup mirror. Some of the older sergeants, men who'd been tankers since before Pearl Harbor, had started making jokes about powder puff tankers and Hollywood soldiers. Even Captain Rodriguez, their company commander, had pulled Morrison aside to ask if his gunner was having problems with the stress of combat. The whispers followed McKenna everywhere. In the chow line, he'd hear men talking about the crazy gunner with the mirror. In the motor pool, mechanics would make jokes about installing vanity lights in tank turrets. During briefings, other tank commanders would glance at him and shake their heads, as if he were some kind of curiosity, a soldier who'd finally cracked under the pressure of war. But McKenna had kept working with the mirror, learning its secrets with the patience his father had taught him. He discovered that by adjusting the angle slightly, he could see down lanes that appeared empty to the naked eye. He'd learned to read the subtle differences between shadows cast by trees and shadows cast by German equipment. Most importantly, he'd learned to trust what the mirror showed him, even when his other senses said nothing was there. The breakthrough had come 2 days ago, during a reconnaissance patrol near the village of Tilly-sur-Seulles. McKenna's mirror had shown him a German anti-tank gun positioned in a farmhouse window, invisible to everyone else in the platoon. When he'd reported the contact, Lieutenant Morrison had been skeptical, but he'd ordered the tank to fire a high-explosive round at the building anyway. The explosion had revealed not just one anti-tank gun, but an entire German position, 3 Panzerschreck teams, and a machine gun nest that would have slaughtered the American patrol. After that, the jokes had stopped. Not completely, but enough that McKenna could do his job without constant ridicule. Morrison had started asking for his observations during briefings. The other crew members had begun to trust his reports, even when they couldn't see what he was seeing. But the nickname had stuck: Mirrors McKenna, the gunner who fought with a shaving mirror taped to his periscope. Now, as Iron Horse creeps forward through the narrow lane between towering hedgerows, McKenna's mirror is showing him exactly what he'd feared it would: a perfectly planned German ambush. The lead Panzer IV sits motionless about 50 yards ahead, positioned to cover the intersection where their lane meets the main road. Its long 75mm KWK-40 gun is trained on the exact spot where Iron Horse will emerge in less than 30 seconds. The German gunner probably has his sight picture already lined up, his finger on the trigger, waiting for the American tank to present itself as a target. Behind the first tank, McKenna can make out the angular shapes of 2 more Panzers through his mirror's reflection. One appears to be another Mark IV, its gun also trained on the intersection. But the third looks different, larger, with the distinctive sloped armor and long gun barrel of a Panzer V Panther. The Germans have positioned themselves in a classic L-shaped ambush, with overlapping fields of fire that will turn the intersection into a killing zone. Any American tank that enters that space will be hit from multiple angles simultaneously. The tactical situation is perfect from the German perspective. They've chosen their ground carefully, positioning themselves where the bocage gives them maximum concealment and the Americans maximum exposure. The narrow lane forces Iron Horse to approach in a straight line, with no room to maneuver. The high hedgerows prevent the American tank from seeing the ambush until it's too late. It's a textbook example of how to use terrain to multiply combat effectiveness. Contact front, McKenna whispers into his throat mic, his voice barely audible over the rumble of their Ford GAA engine. The intercom system crackles with static, a constant reminder of how isolated they are in their steel box. Panzer, 50 yards, 11 o'clock, 2 more behind it. Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackles back through the intercom, distorted by static and the constant vibration of the tank. I don't see anything, McKenna. You sure about this? All I see is hedgerow and shadows. McKenna adjusts the mirror slightly, tilting it to get a better angle on the German position. The image becomes clearer, and he can see more details that make his stomach clench with fear. The German tank commander is visible in his cupola, scanning the lane with binoculars. The man looks young, probably no older than Morrison, but his movements are confident, practiced. This crew has done this before, probably many times. They know exactly how long it takes an American tank to traverse this lane, exactly when to fire for maximum effect, exactly how to coordinate their fire with the other tanks in the ambush. 3 tanks, sir, McKenna reports, his mouth dry as dust. The fear is starting to build now, that familiar cold weight in his stomach that comes before combat. They're waiting for us. Lead tank has his gun trained on the intersection. The others are positioned to catch us in a crossfire. Kowalski, halt, Morrison orders. The Sherman lurches to a stop, its engine settling into a rough idle that sends vibrations through the hull. The sudden silence feels ominous after the constant noise of movement. In the quiet, McKenna can hear other sounds, the distant rumble of artillery, the buzz of insects in the hedgerows, the faint sound of German voices carried on the wind. McKenna, I still don't see a damn thing, Morrison says, his voice tight with frustration. Are you reading that mirror right? Because if you're wrong about this, we're sitting here like ducks in a pond. The question hangs in the air like cordite smoke. McKenna knows what they're all thinking, that the stress has finally gotten to him, that he's seeing things in his precious mirror. He's heard the whispers, knows that some of the crew think he's cracking up under the pressure of combat. The bocage has broken stronger men than him. Just last week, Sergeant Williams from C Company had been found wandering in a field, talking to himself about German tanks that weren't there. But the reflection doesn't lie. Through the small piece of silvered glass, McKenna can see the German commander lower his binoculars and say something to his crew. The Panzer's gun barrel makes a slight adjustment, fine-tuning its aim. In the turret of the second tank, McKenna can see movement, probably the gunner making his own preparations. These aren't hallucinations or stress-induced visions. These are real German tanks with real German crews, waiting to kill Americans. Sir, request permission to engage, McKenna says, his hand moving to the gun controls. The familiar weight of the traverse handle feels solid, reassuring. He's fired this gun hundreds of times in training, knows exactly how it responds to his touch. I can take the shot through the mirror. Through the mirror? Morrison's voice carries a note of disbelief that cuts through the intercom static. McKenna, you can't fire blind. We need visual confirmation before we engage. That's basic tank doctrine, straight from the manual. I have visual, sir. The mirror shows me the angle. I can put a round right through that gap in the hedgerow. McKenna's voice is steady now, the fear burning away as his training takes over. This is what he's been preparing for since he first climbed into a tank turret. All those hours on the gunnery range, all those drills and exercises, have led to this moment. The seconds tick by like hours. McKenna can hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears, mixing with the steady rumble of the Sherman's engine and the distant sound of artillery from another sector. Through his mirror, he watches the German commander raise his binoculars again, scanning the lane where Iron Horse sits hidden. The man's face is clearly visible in the reflection. Young, serious, professional. Just another soldier doing his job, waiting to kill Americans. In the hull, Kowalski shifts nervously in his driver's seat. Jesus, LT, if Tommy says there's krauts out there, maybe we should listen. He's been right about everything else since we got to this godforsaken country. Sir, Chen's voice breaks the silence, unusually firm for the normally quiet loader. If Tommy says he can see them, maybe we should trust him. He spotted that anti-tank gun at Tilly when nobody else could see it. Shut it, Chen, Morrison snaps. But McKenna can hear the uncertainty creeping into the lieutenant's voice. They all know what happens to tanks that get caught in ambushes in the bocage. The burned-out hulks they'd passed that morning, 3 Shermans from a company, their crews buried in shallow graves beside the road, were proof enough of what German anti-tank guns could do to American armor. McKenna makes a decision that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Without waiting for permission, he begins to traverse the gun slightly left, using the mirror to line up his shot. The reflection shows him the exact angle needed to put a 75mm shell through the gap in the hedgerow and into the side armor of the lead panzer. His father's voice echoes in his memory. "When you see your shot, son, you take it. Hesitation gets you killed, and it gets other people killed too." The gun traverse motor whines softly as the turret begins to turn. McKenna can feel the massive weight of the 75mm gun moving, the hydraulic systems responding to his commands. Through his mirror, he watches the German tank commander suddenly stiffen as if he's heard something. The man lowers his binoculars and looks directly toward Iron Horse's position, though he can't possibly see the American tank through the hedgerow. "McKenna, what the hell are you?" The Sherman rocks backward as McKenna fires. The 75mm M3L40 gun belches flame and smoke, and the M61 armor-piercing shell screams through the gap in the hedgerow at 2,030 feet per second. The muzzle blast is deafening inside the turret, even with their headphones on. The recoil sends a shockwave through the entire tank, rattling every bolt and rivet. Cordite smoke fills the fighting compartment, making McKenna's eyes water as he peers through his mirror to spot the fall of shot. Through the reflection, he sees the round impact the Panzer's side armor in a shower of orange sparks and white-hot metal fragments. The German tank lurches sideways as the shell penetrates the armor and detonates inside the fighting compartment. Almost immediately, thick black smoke begins pouring from its engine compartment and turret hatches. The tank commander disappears into his turret, probably trying to assess the damage or coordinate with his crew. Or maybe he's already dead. "Jesus Christ!" Morrison shouts over the intercom, his voice filled with amazement and terror. "You hit something. I can see smoke rising over the hedgerow." But McKenna is already working the gun controls, traversing right as Chen slams another M61 armor-piercing shell into the breech. The loader's movements are smooth and practiced. They've done this drill hundreds of times in training, but never under fire, never with German tanks shooting back. The smell of cordite mixes with the diesel fumes and gun oil, creating a cocktail of war that McKenna will never forget. The mirror shows McKenna the 2nd Panzer, another Mark IV with the longer KWK 40 75mm gun, starting to move. The German commander has realized they're under attack, but he can't see where the fire is coming from. The Panzer begins backing away from its original position, trying to get a better angle on the hidden American tank. But the German commander is making a mistake. He's moving predictably, following the natural contours of the terrain. "Second target, 2 o'clock, McKenna calls out, his voice steady now. The fear has burned away completely, replaced by the cold focus his father had taught him during those hunting trips in the Montana wilderness. Range 50 yards, moving left to right. The German tank is trying to reposition, backing along a farm track that runs parallel to the hedgerow. But McKenna can read the commander's intentions through his mirror, can see exactly where the German tank will stop to fire. The Panzer will back up about 20 yards, then pivot to bring its gun to bear on Iron Horse's position. It's a standard German tactic, one they've probably used successfully many times before. McKenna adjusts his aim, leading the target just like his father had taught him to lead a running deer. The traverse motor whines as the gun swings right, tracking the moving Panzer. Through his mirror, he can see the German tank commander in his cupola, probably shouting orders to his crew. The man looks desperate now, no longer the confident professional who'd been waiting in ambush just moments before. The second shot comes 38 seconds after the first. McKenna fires just as the German tank begins to pivot, catching it at the moment when its side armor is most exposed. The shell punches through the Panzer's turret ring, that vulnerable joint where the turret meets the hull, and detonates inside the fighting compartment. Through his reflection, McKenna watches as the German tank's crew begins bailing out. Smoke and flame pouring from the turret hatches as the tank's ammunition begins to cook off in a series of secondary explosions. 2 down, he reports, already searching for the third tank. The mirror shows him movement, the Panther, the most dangerous of the 3, backing away from the intersection. But it's not retreating. The German commander is too smart and too experienced for that. He's positioning himself for a shot at Iron Horse, trying to get an angle that will let him fire through the hedgerow. The Panther is a formidable opponent. 45 tons of steel and death, armed with a 75mm WWII-42 gun that can punch through a Sherman's frontal armor at ranges that would make American tankers weep. Its sloped armor can deflect most American shells, and its crew is probably veteran, experienced in the kind of close-range fighting that the bocage demands. If that tank gets a clear shot at Iron Horse, McKenna and his crew are finished. Third target backing up, McKenna calls out, his voice tight with concentration. Panther tank, he's trying to get an angle on us. This one's dangerous, sir. This time Morrison doesn't hesitate. The lieutenant has seen enough to know that McKenna's mirror isn't just working. It's keeping them alive. Take the shot, Sergeant. Fire when ready. McKenna adjusts the mirror one more time, calculating the angle as the German tank moves. The Panther commander thinks he's safe, probably assuming the American fire is coming from somewhere else. Maybe from tank destroyers hidden in the next field, or from a Sherman position further down the main road. He has no idea that a 50-cent shaving mirror is giving McKenna a perfect view of his movements. The Panther stops behind a thick section of hedgerow, its massive gun beginning to traverse toward Iron Horse's position. McKenna can see the German gunner working his controls through a gap in the foliage, probably trying to line up a shot through the hedgerow. The Panther's 75mm WWII-42 gun is one of the most feared weapons on the battlefield. It can kill a Sherman at ranges where the American tank can't even scratch the German's armor. Through his mirror, McKenna watches the Panther's gun barrel swing toward their position. The German gunner is good. He's calculated Iron Horse's approximate location based on the muzzle flashes from the previous shots. In a few seconds, that long gun will be pointed directly at them, and the German will fire through the hedgerow, hoping to hit the American tank with a blind shot. McKenna knows he has one chance. The Panther's side armor is thick, but there's a weak spot where the turret meets the hull, the same spot he'd hit on the second Panzer. If he can put a shell through that gap, he might be able to penetrate the armor and disable the tank. If he misses, or if the shell bounces off the sloped armor, the Panther will return fire, and Iron Horse will become another burned-out hulk beside a Norman road. The third shot comes 2 minutes and 15 seconds after the second. McKenna fires just as the German tank stops, its gun still traversing toward their position. The 75mm shell catches the Panther in the side, right where the turret armor is thinnest. The round penetrates and detonates inside the fighting compartment, and through his mirror, McKenna watches the German tank's turret lift slightly as the ammunition explodes, then settle back down as flames pour from every opening. The entire engagement has lasted 3 minutes and 52 seconds. 3 German tanks destroyed, and Iron Horse hasn't even shown itself to the enemy. Holy shit! Kowalski breathes over the intercom, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. Tommy, how the hell did you do that? I never even saw the bastards. It was like you were shooting ghosts. McKenna slumps back in his gunner's seat, his hands shaking as the adrenaline begins to fade. The mirror, still taped to his periscope mount, reflects the smoke rising from the burning German tanks. The acrid smell of cordite mixes with the diesel fumes from their engine, creating a cocktail of war that he'll carry with him for the rest of his life. Just like hunting deer back home, he says quietly, his voice barely audible over the crackling flames. Sometimes you gotta see around corners. Lieutenant Morrison's voice comes through the intercom, different now, Respectful, almost reverent. "McKenna, I owe you an apology. Hell, I owe you more than that. That was incredible shooting. How did you know they were there? How did you know exactly where to aim?" But McKenna barely hears him. He's thinking about the German tank crews, wondering if any of them made it out alive. The mirror that had saved his life and the lives of his crew had also made him a killer 3 times over in less than 4 minutes. The reflection shows him the truth of war, that survival often comes at a terrible cost, that the line between hero and killer is sometimes measured in seconds and inches. As Iron Horse moves forward to secure the intersection, McKenna can see other Sherman tanks from their company approaching through the smoke. Word of the engagement has already spread over the radio. Captain Rodriguez's voice crackles through the company net, requesting a detailed after-action report. Other tank commanders are asking how McKenna managed to engage targets he couldn't see with his regular periscope. How he'd managed to destroy 3 German tanks without taking a single hit in return. By evening, half the tanks in B Company will have mirrors taped to their periscopes. Sergeants will be scrounging through abandoned buildings, looking for any reflective surface they can adapt for combat use. By the end of the week, the technique will spread to the entire 2nd Armored Division. Within a month, tank crews across Normandy will be using McKenna's stupid trick to fight the bocage on their own terms. The bocage fighting continues for weeks after that day. McKenna's mirror trick spreads through the division like wildfire, then jumps to other units as crews share their experiences and survival techniques. Tank commanders who had mocked the idea begin requesting mirrors from supply. The technique saves dozens of American tanks and hundreds of lives as crews learn to see around corners, through gaps, over obstacles that would normally require fatal exposure. But for McKenna, the mirror becomes both salvation and curse. Every reflection reminds him of that day, of the 3 German tanks burning in the Norman countryside, of the young tank commander who'd been scanning the lane with binoculars just moments before McKenna's shell ended his war forever. He keeps the mirror throughout the war, through the breakout from Normandy when Patton's Third Army raced across France, through the bitter fighting in the Ardennes when German Panzers nearly broke through American lines, through the final push into Germany when the Reich was collapsing around them. The mirror saves his life a dozen more times. In the Falaise pocket, it shows him a German anti-tank gun positioned in a church steeple, waiting to ambush American tanks as they advance through the town square. Near Bastogne, it reveals a camouflaged Jagdpanzer waiting in a tree line, its long gun trained on the road where American reinforcements are expected to appear. In the Rhineland, it helps him spot a Panzerfaust team creeping through rubble, trying to get close enough to Iron Horse to use their deadly rocket-propelled grenades. Each time, the reflection gives him the edge he needs to survive, to keep his crew alive, to complete the mission and move on to the next objective. But it never stops showing him the faces of the men he's killed. The young Panzer commander from that first engagement haunts his dreams, appearing in reflections everywhere, in puddles, in windows, in the polished surface of his mess kit. McKenna had seen the man's face clearly in the mirror's reflection just before he fired. Serious, professional, probably thinking about his own crew's safety right up until the moment the 75mm shell ended his war forever. After the war, McKenna returns to Montana, to the timber and mountains where his father taught him to hunt and fish and read the signs of the wilderness. He tries to go back to the woods, to find peace in the familiar rhythms of the logging camp where he'd worked before the war. But every reflection, in a stream, in a window, in a piece of broken glass, takes him back to that narrow lane in Normandy. The mirror that made him a hero has also made him a prisoner of his own memories. He marries his high school sweetheart, Sarah, who'd waited for him through 4 years of war. They raise 3 children in a small house near the lumber mill, and McKenna works his way up from sawyer to foreman to assistant manager. On the surface, he's a success story, the local war hero who came home and built a good life for himself and his family. The American Legion makes him their post commander. The VFW asks him to speak at Memorial Day ceremonies. The local newspaper runs a feature story about his war service, calling him the tank gunner who could see around corners. But in the quiet moments when the weight of memory becomes too heavy to bear, he finds himself staring at reflective surfaces, seeing not his own face but the faces of German tank crews who never made it home. The nightmares come in waves, sometimes months apart, sometimes night after night. Sometimes he's back in the turret of Iron Horse, watching through his mirror as enemy tanks burn. Sometimes he's the German commander, seeing an American shell coming through his periscope at the last second, knowing there's nothing he can do to save his crew. The war ended in 1945, but for McKenna it never really stops. The mirror shows him that truth every day, in every reflection, in every piece of glass or water or polished metal that catches his eye. He tries to explain it to Sarah, tries to make her understand why he sometimes wakes up screaming, why he can't look at mirrors without seeing burning tanks and dying men. But how do you explain to someone who wasn't there what it feels like to kill 3 men in 4 minutes? How do you describe the weight of survival when it comes at the cost of other people's lives? Years later, when historians write about the innovations that helped win the war, they mention radar and rockets, computers and code breaking, proximity fuses and shaped charges. They write about the Manhattan Project and the Enigma machine, about sonar and jet engines and all the high-tech marvels that gave the Allies their edge. They rarely mention the small shaving mirror that a young gunner from Montana taped to his periscope, or the 4 minutes that changed everything for the men of Iron Horse. The official histories focus on grand strategy and major battles, on the decisions made by generals and politicians thousands of miles from the front lines. They don't talk about the improvised solutions that kept individual crews alive, the desperate innovations born of necessity and fear. They don't mention that sometimes the difference between life and death came down to a 50-cent mirror and the willingness to trust what it showed you. But in the archives of the 2nd Armored Division, there's a brief mention in the after-action reports from Normandy. Sergeant McKenna's improvised periscope extension proved highly effective in bocage terrain, the report states in dry military language. Recommend adoption of similar devices by other units operating in similar conditions. The bureaucratic prose can't capture the terror of that moment. The split-second decision that saved 4 American lives and ended 3 German ones. McKenna keeps the mirror for 60 years, wrapped in the same olive drab cloth he used to clean it during the war. It sits in a box in his attic, along with his Bronze Star, his campaign ribbons, his Purple Heart from a piece of shrapnel that caught him near Aachen, and the letters he never sent to the families of the German tank crews he killed. He hasn't looked at it in decades, but he knows it's there, waiting. Sometimes, late at night when sleep won't come and the memories press too close, he can still hear the sound of tank treads on stone, still smell the cordite and burning metal, still feel the recoil of the 75mm gun as it fired through the hedgerow. The mirror showed him how to win, but it also showed him the cost of winning. Every reflection carries the weight of those 3 German tanks, burning in a Norman intersection while their crews died inside. In his final years, as age and illness begin to take their toll, McKenna sometimes wonders what would have happened if he'd never brought that mirror to war. Would those 3 German tank crews have gone home to their families? Would he have found peace in the Montana woods? Would Iron Horse have survived that ambush? Or would they have joined the burned-out hulks beside the Norman roads? The reflection never gives him an answer, only shows him the truth he's carried for 6 decades. That sometimes the things that save us are the same things that haunt us forever. The mirror that made him a hero also made him a killer, and the line between those 2 things is thinner than the silvered glass that showed him how to see around corners. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, when the weight of memory becomes unbearable. He wonders if the young gunner who taped that mirror to his periscope knew what he was really creating, not just a tool for seeing around corners, but a window into the soul of war itself, reflecting back all the terrible choices that ordinary men make in extraordinary circumstances. What would you have done in McKenna's position, faced with an impossible choice in those crucial seconds? Would you have trusted the reflection in a simple mirror to save your crew's lives, knowing that success meant ending the lives of others? The stories of ordinary soldiers making extraordinary decisions under impossible pressure remind us that heroism often comes from the most unexpected places, and that the cost of survival is sometimes measured in the nightmares that follow us home. If these tales of innovation and courage in the darkest of times resonate with you, consider supporting this channel with a like and subscription, and share in the comments what improvised solution you think you might have tried in the deadly bocage of Normandy.